Hello. Thank you for joining us this evening. First, I wanted to take a minute and say that everyone who's been affected by the COVID-19, you are in our thoughts and prayers. And I also wanted to thank our first responders. We are so thankful for you guys and putting your lives on the line every single day for us. So thank you so much. So let's get started this evening. It's that time again where you probably got one of these in the mail and your heart probably kind of stopped for a minute and you kind of hit that panic button and said, what am I going to do about my property tax appraised value? So hello, I'm Denisha Denny. I'm the owner broker of REMAX 3D Real Estate here in Greenville. And tonight we have our chief appraiser with us, Mr. Brent South, and he is going to talk to us about the process of protesting your appraised value. Hello, Brent. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Denisha. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here. I wish it was under different circumstances and we could do another live seminar like we did last year, but we'll just have to deal with this this year and hopefully get back together next year again.
That's right. And we certainly appreciate you agreeing to doing this. And I think this is a great way for us to get the information out to everyone to just better help serve them with information. So thank you. All right. So we have a host today, Mr. Kevin Sawatsky. He's a realtor with REMAX 3D Real Estate. He is going to be the host this evening, and he and Brent are going to take you through the process of how to protest your appraised value. But before I turn it over to the gentleman, first of all, hello, Kevin. I didn't say hello to you. How are you this evening?
Hi, Denisha. Thanks for getting this set up. You know, I think this is an awfully important topic, and Brent, I really appreciate you agreeing to join us again this year. We really had, I thought, what was a very valuable event last year, and look forward to doing it again tonight. I agree with the sentiment, though. I'd rather be doing this up on a stage somewhere, so let's get back to that.
Well, and I wish we were doing this Friday afternoon after I had a chance to get to the barber shop, so I apologize about the long hair.
I got to mine.
I know. Okay, I can relate. I can't tilt my head too far down. All right. Before I turn this over to Kevin and to Brent tonight, I do want to give a full disclosure. We are not attorneys. We are not a licensed property tax consultant. And so I wanted you to know we are realtors. And so we can provide you a comparative market analysis, or as you will hear in the presentation, a CMA. But this is for informational purposes tonight. So this is, if you have additional questions, you should seek the professional that you need to for additional questions. So enjoy this as good, solid information and use the professionals where you need them. So let's talk about how you can ask questions and comments. So you are able to write comments and questions as the presentation is going on. And at the end of the presentation, as time allows, I'm going to pick out a few questions that we can answer for everyone here. And then we'll follow up with any other questions that we were not able to address during this time. Make sure, though, when you're getting ready to post a comment or question, that you are giving permission so that we can see that your actual comment. Otherwise, it's not going to come on the feed this evening. Okay, so if you have a specific question about your property that's very specific, if you will hold those until the end, or actually not till the end, if you'll hold those for the actual appraisal district, that way they can answer your specific questions. So when you're posting questions and comments, if you would just keep them general so that we can answer general questions. But if it's very specific, I want you to reach out to the appraisal district and they can answer those questions specifically for you. If you would like a CMA or a comparative market analysis, we do have our real estate agents here and on standby, and we're willing and able and ready to provide a CMA to you if you would like. So if you would also put that request in the comments, then we can, after the show, come back and connect with you so that we can get that to you as well. All right. I think we've covered it all. I am going to turn the show over to you, Kevin, and y'all take it away.
Great. Thank you, Denisha. And again, welcome, Brent. I'm so glad that we get a chance to do this. And I do really appreciate your willingness to jump in and walk through this with us. I get asked a lot of times, you know, why as a realtor why do I teach this class? And I'll start out with the only commercial that you'll hear for us as a organization. REMAX 3D is a group of 17 agents that lives and breathes and works in Hunt County and the surrounding counties. We last year closed more than $54 million in transactions, and that's really because our clients refer people to us. Our referrals refer people to us, and we are deeply integrated into this community. As an organization, we donated more than $53,000 to Hunt County causes, and that's a part of being able to give back to a community that has been so supportive of how we do what we do. We have a couple of resources that we've created. One on Facebook, you'll see Love Where You Live Hunt County often referred to on various posts. We really do like people to be able to check and see what's going on in our community. And then as you see at the bottom there, Hunt County Resources is a brand new Facebook page that we created. We have almost 1,000 members who go to that and contribute to that to find out what they can do and where to go for information during this really odd time in our community's culture. So that's part of the reason we do this. The other reason that I started doing this several years ago was because I see clients look at their houses as such an emotional thing, and it really is emotional. People get invested in their house. But in reality, our houses are also one of the biggest assets that we have. And just like with the rest of our assets, we really do need to be managing them. And whatever information we have about management allows us to do a better job of that. And there are some things that I think people can do to do a better job of that. And so I was giving these 7 tips over and over again, and it's just easier to do in this format. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. The screen that you see in front of you is a list of taxes that the average American pays, and there's a lot there. And most of the taxes we pay, we really don't even realize. We don't realize when we put a gallon of gas in all the taxes that we're paying, and when we go and eat at a restaurant, we don't pay attention to the fact that there's sales tax on that. So there are just tons and tons of ways we get taxed, and you might think that tonight we're going to be talking about property taxes, but that really is not the case. Brent, can you kind of walk us through why this isn't specifically about taxes?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I'm glad you mentioned that. You know, when we talk about the function of the appraisal district, and we'll get into what our role is a little bit here shortly, but most people, when they receive that appraisal notice in the mail and they see that their value has increased on the appraisal roll, their first thought is, oh, great, my taxes are going up. And they want to come to our office and they want to protest their taxes and the amount of taxes that they pay. And I think it's important for people to understand that the property tax system in the state of Texas, it's a 3-legged stool. You've got the appraised value that comes from our office, and then you've got the revenue needs from the taxing units, and then the tax rates that they adopt that ultimately determines the amount of property taxes you're going to pay as an individual. And so I just wanted to hopefully tonight help clarify what our role is as far as the valuation process goes, and give property owners a better understanding of how they can come to our office and appeal the value portion of that 3-legged stool. And let's just keep in mind, when you come to our office, we have to talk about value. We can't help you with the amount of taxes that you pay. You have issues with the amount of taxes you pay, then you need to show up in August at the taxing unit hearings. They have public hearings where they adopt those tax rates. And that's the appropriate place to talk about property taxes themselves.
Okay, so tonight we're talking very specifically about the value of the house that you have to send on to those various taxing entities, and as they create their budgets, then because they now know what those various values, all the properties that they have, they can set their tax rate based on that value, and that's what actually ends up as your tax rate. You mentioned the property notice, and that, of course, is the thing that people just got. Denisha showed the envelope, and your property notice probably looks something like this. This is actually from a client of mine this year who gave me his permission to use it. And I want to point out a couple of things, because I think there are some misunderstandings about the numbers here. If you don't look at this and you don't spend some time with it, you may not understand. And I think if you do, you probably will be able to answer your own questions better. So I want to show a couple of things. One, obviously 2 columns. You see the number that was there for last year, and that's the valuation on which your property taxes were based last year. In the green on the right is the proposed for 2020. There's that big notice in the middle, don't pay from this notice because your tax bill doesn't go out till October. We aren't, again, talking about taxes, we're talking about those values. So last year is a comparison to this year. This property, obviously, you see, has some fairly significant increases in it, and people may have experienced big increases. And so let's dig into that a little bit. One of the number one questions that I get is this question about improvements. You know, I didn't make any improvements to my house this year. I didn't do anything. I didn't add a room. I didn't put a second story on. I didn't put a barn on the property. Brent, tell me a little bit about what the word improvements means.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Texas Property Tax Code, it does require us on this appraisal notice to break the value out between land and improvements on the land or improvements to the land. And so when we talk about improvements, we're talking about any permanent buildings or structures or amenities that are attached to that piece of property. And you're right, Kevin, we get that question in our office all the time. People will get their appraisal notice, the improvement value has increased, and their first question is, how can that happen? I didn't make any improvements. Well, what we're talking about is what is the value of the improvements that are on that land? So that'd be your house, any barns, any outbuildings, swimming pools, anything that is attached to the land is going to be the improvement value that you see on that appraisal notice.
Okay. Yeah, I try to clarify that to my clients by saying improvements is anything that a human did to it. So the land is underneath, anything a human did is the improvements, and you see market value of ag land and so on underneath here. But I kind of want to jump down a little bit to this market value. In this case, you see that market value in 2019 was $84,000, and this year $119,000. Market value is a really important number, but ultimately it's not the number that we're trying to get to, at least in terms of what you are certifying in terms of tax rolls. It is important, though, for us to understand where this number comes from. If we take a look at market value is actually sort of a simple term. If I sell my house, I'm willing to sell it for a number. And someone buying my house is willing to buy it for a number. And when those two numbers meet and a transaction happens, that's really the definition of market value. And Texas Property Code actually requires you to appraise properties using that number, right?
That's correct. And when we talk about market value, it's important to point out that when you mention sales and what a property would transfer for cash or its equivalent in the open market, we're looking at arm's length transactions. Talking about a sale between family members. A lot of times foreclosures will occur that may be below market value for whatever reason. So when we're talking about what your property would sell for at its market value, that's if it were exposed to the open market for a reasonable period of time with a willing buyer and a willing seller. There's no pressure on each side to sell the property. Those are the types of transactions that we're talking about when we deal with market value. And it's also important to understand that while the market value is not necessarily the value that you're taxed on because of exemptions and other things that we'll talk about shortly, the market value is important for you to look at because the reduction of your exemptions will come off of the market value. So you do need to pay attention to what that market value is that we have on the appraisal notice.
Yeah. So if we understand that about market value, then the next number on here that ultimately is probably the most important one for most people as it relates to them trying to decide what's going on with their property taxes is appraised value. And this can be affected by lots of different things. In this case, this example, this was a house that was bought in 2019. So there is really no difference between market value and appraised value. Those two things happen to be the same. That isn't always the case, of course, and there's so many reasons for that. It can be homestead caps from the past. It can be exemptions. There are just lots of things that affect each individual property's appraised value. Anything that we should be paying attention to there?
Yeah, I think that you honed in on something that people need to understand, and that's the homestead cap limitation. And that's that 10% protection that the homestead exemption provides year over year. A lot of times you will see your market value actually goes up more than 10% in 1 year. But if it is your homestead property, you'll notice that the appraised value is capped at a 10% increase. Now that 10% increase will continue on each year until the appraised value catches back up to the market value. Exactly. But that's the difference. And then you'll also notice on ag property, if you have the ag use appraisal, then you'll see a difference between the market and the assessed or the appraised value, because when we're talking about ag value, we're looking at the potential income from the land according to its ag use.
Okay. Yeah. And while we're talking about exemptions, well, let's back up a second here. Appraised value, we're going to ask a question here in a minute, but we get this question a lot too. When does that get set? What's the date? Is it the value today? We're already almost in the middle of May. Is it the value today? And of course, the slide has already answered the question, but tell us a little bit about that January 1st date.
Yeah, the Texas Property Tax Code, section 23.01, is very specific that we take a snapshot of the real estate market and the value of properties as of January 1st each year. And there has to be a set date that those appraisals are made from, because the real estate market is constantly changing. And if we didn't have a set date, we wouldn't be able to take that picture and provide an accurate number to the taxing units, because it would always be adjusting. And so the legislature has set January 1 as the fixed date that we make all of our appraisals from.
Okay. All right. I want to jump back to, we're going to come back to this in a second, but I want to jump to the discussion we were just having about exemptions. There are a number of exemptions that can affect the valuation of a property as it relates to property taxes eventually, right?
Absolutely. When you look at your property and your appraisal notice, make sure that if it's your home, if it's your primary residence, make sure you see that homestead exemption on there. If you're age 65 or over and it's your primary residence, make sure you've got the over 65 exemption. Those will definitely help you on the ultimate tax liability for your property. The home reduces the amount that you base it off of by $25,000 for school districts. Cities and counties can provide a local option exemption, but it's mandated $25,000 for schools. And then for the over 65, it gives an additional $10,000, and it freezes the amount of taxes that you pay the year that you turn 65. Very important to do that and make sure if you do not have that on your primary residence, contact our office. We'll walk you through the process and help you out.
Okay. And on this notice, it will tell you that, because on that bottom line, if you look all the way over on the right-hand side, you'll see HS. So this homeowner has a homestead exemption for 2020. One thing I do want to point out on here is people often question the 10% that you were just talking about. And here's a perfect example. Someone looks at this and says, whoa, 84 to 119, that's way more than 10%. But the reason for that has to do with this being the year of purchase.
Yes, that's a good point. So the way that the 10% cap works, it's only applicable the year after you've already been granted the homestead exemption. So if you just bought the home and you didn't have the exemption in the previous year, then it sets the value the first year that you purchase and qualify for that homestead exemption.
Yeah. Typically, we do this seminar at the end of April. This year obviously is a weird year. And so that end of April is a really important date for homestead. Homestead has to be filed by April 30th, but no earlier than January 1st of the calendar year after you buy the home. So a lot of times our clients will buy a home and they want to rush right over and they want to fill out their homestead, and they call us and say, hey, they wouldn't let me do it, because they don't understand that they can't do that until the year following.
Right. And something I want to point out on that, if you don't make that April 30th deadline, there's no need to panic. The tax code allows us to go back 2 years and and adjust the roll to apply that homestead exemption if you qualify.
Awesome. Okay.
And also this year, there are some things on that homestead exemption that may require a notary. And we also have to get a copy of your driver's license to show that the address on your driver's license matches the address on the property. And we understand that there's a lot of folks who just purchased homes and they're not able to get their driver's license updated right now because those offices have been closed. There's no need to panic. We've got plenty of time. You can go back and get that put on for up to 2 years. So we're just asking people to wait until the driver's license offices open back up, get their new license showing the address, and then we can proceed and process it at that point.
Okay, awesome. I just wanted to highlight on here that what people are seeing at the bottom of this set of numbers is the various taxing entities. You can see in this case, Greenville City, Hunt County, Hunt Memorial Hospital District, Greenville ISD are the 4 taxing entities that this property is a part of. Then you see the proposed value, that's the appraised value that we just saw in the chart above. The 2020 taxable value is that number, except at the bottom, as you said, the Greenville ISD portion of this is reduced by $25,000, but then it's multiplied by the 2019 tax rate. We, of course, don't have a 2020 tax rate. That doesn't get decided until this summer. So the 2019 tax rate is on here. And so you kind of have an estimate based on this valuation and last year's tax rates. Then you get a number and you see that in the red box here. I understand that this is something that's going away shortly.
Yeah, Kevin, the 86th legislature, they determined that this was very confusing for property owners because it is an estimate based on last year's tax rates. And so, as you're aware, the way that the property tax system is designed is as values increase, for taxing units to generate the same amount of revenue, they can lower their tax rates.
Mm-hmm.
So appraisal notice, what happens is the value has increased on this appraisal notice, but it's still reflecting last year's higher tax rate. So it tends to panic people and create a lot of anxiety and stress when they see that large increase in the estimate of taxes. So under Senate Bill 2 from the last legislative session, starting in 2022, these estimate of taxes will no longer be on the appraisal notice. Now, what will happen is we will send out an additional postcard in August of each year, directing people to a real-time tax database where they can go and see what the proposed tax rates are for each taxing unit that taxes their property. And then they can show up at those public hearings. It'll list the date, time, and location of the public hearings. And it also has a public feedback mechanism on that website where they can contact their elected officials directly through the website to give them their opinion of their proposed tax rate.
Okay, and that's 2022?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so we've got a couple of years yet of seeing something like this, but we know that that change is coming.
Absolutely.
Okay, this might also be a good spot to talk about. I have people ask me, wasn't that 10% reduced to 3.5%? And that's a mixing of two numbers that really don't connect to each other.
Right. Under the same Senate Bill 2 from last session, what they did is they put a revenue cap on taxing units. They said that if a city or a county wants to generate more than 3.5% revenue than they had in the previous year, they have to go seek voter approval to do so. Under the old law, it was an 8% rollback rate is what they called it. But there had to be a petition signed by the voters for an election. They've reduced that to a 3.5%. They now call it the voter approval rate. And if the entity wants to go above that 3.5% revenue increase, then there's an automatic election to be able to do so. And so we do get that question. People will come in and they'll say, well, I understand the legislature can't raise my value more than 3.5%. That's, like you said, that's mixing too. That's on the revenue side, not on the appraisal side. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
Awesome. Well, and it makes even more important showing up to vote, right? Because it's not only people you're voting for, but if there's an item in a vote that could increase your taxes, we should have a say in that. And that's when we talk about taxes. That's where we can have input differently than we can on the individual values that we're talking to the Central Appraisal District about here.
Sure. And I think that, if there is a true need, if a county or a city is growing and those city officials or county officials can show that they need additional revenue to hire additional police officers or firefighters, I think that the general public understands that and they'd be willing to accept that. But this just allows them to go out and have more of a voice in that process.
Awesome. Thank you for pointing that out. I think that's something we can be watching for as we move forward into the future. I love the idea of being notified of who the taxing entities are and having a mechanism to get to them, because that's kind of who we are as a culture, right? We want to participate in that. So, okay, I want to get away from this notice because we've spent quite a bit of time here. It's important, but before we get to the 7-step process of protesting your property values, a couple of questions. The first one is, of course, one that I bet you're getting all over the place here. So, question is, will the effects of the pandemic, this environment we're currently in, be taken into account for this year's taxes?
Yeah, we are getting that question a lot. And unfortunately, the answer to that question is no. The Texas Property Tax Code is very clear and very specific that our assessment date and our appraisal date is January 1st of each year. So nothing that's happening in the economy due to the COVID-19 pandemic is being taken into consideration for the 2020 appraisals. We understand that folks are out of work, businesses are closed due to no fault of their own. Unfortunately, we looked through the tax code. We had discussions with the governor's office, with the comptroller's office, and we all agree that the tax code is very clear that we have to look at what was happening in the real estate market as of January 1. And to be real honest with you, Kevin, even if that weren't the case, I don't think we have enough data. Well, I know we don't have enough data to justify the fact that the real estate market has really changed since January 1. Now, that doesn't mean that in the third or fourth quarter of 2020, we might see the impact of this pandemic on the real estate market. And if that's the case, those will be reflected in the 2021 reappraisal.
Okay. And there is the possibility that the taxing entities would have the ability to do something in terms of tax rates, even though the value can't accommodate a change due to this for this current year, correct?
That's correct. And, I won't speak for the taxing units on what they're going to do. If this thing is bad enough and if sales taxes are down, it's affecting their revenue, it may be difficult for them to do that. But yeah, correct. They do have the ability on the backside to lower the tax rates to provide property tax relief due to the pandemic.
Okay. So really important to get to your local elected officials and have those conversations whenever that's reasonable. Okay, so here's another question, and this one isn't related specifically to this year, but we hear this a lot. There's so much new build growth in our county and in our community. And so if my home isn't or wasn't finished on January 1st, are you going to set the value at the final value of the home, or is there some kind of an adjustment that gets made to that?
Right. Again, it goes back to that January 1 assessment date. So if your home was under construction on January 1st and it was only 50% complete, what we'll do is we'll run an appraisal on that property as if it were 100% complete, and then we put a 50% adjustment on the house due to the stage of construction that it was in on January 1. So if you, in the process of building your home on January 1, and you noticed that on your appraisal, it looks like 100% complete value, bring us in all your information showing that the home was only 1% complete on the appraisal date, January 1st.
Okay. And while we're talking about the appraisal district, let's talk a little bit specifically about what it does. You've said before that you don't set tax rates. what are the things that specifically your organization does? How does it fit into this whole community?
Right, absolutely. So we are an independent body separate from all the taxing units. We're a political subdivision of the state of Texas. We were created by the Texas legislature in 1979. The purpose of the appraisal district is to have an independent office conduct appraisals for all taxing units within the county. Every county in the state of Texas has an appraisal district that provides these functions. We appraise property. We provide appraisal rolls to the taxing units for them to utilize in setting their budgets and tax rates. And then we also have the responsibility of administering property tax exemptions. So all homestead exemptions, ag use appraisals, veterans exemptions, every property tax exemption that there is comes through our office, and we make the determination if a property qualifies or not.
Okay. And, talking about property values, we kind of know naturally that not every house is worth exactly the same amount. I think that's probably reasonable. We can look at here's two examples, and I don't think anyone would say, well, those two should probably be taxed exactly the same. So the challenge is then what should the value be? And the Constitution requires that there be some uniformity to it, and that there's a relationship between the value of the property and ultimately the amount that it's taxed.
Yeah, absolutely. Equal and uniform is a constitutional requirement, and is to ensure that everyone only pays their fair share of the overall property tax burden. And I like to use the example, Kevin. Let's say if you and I went out to have dinner together, and I ordered a steak and you ordered a hot dog, and the bill was $100, and I said, okay, Kevin, let's split this 50-50. I'll pay $50 and you pay $50. But I had steak and you had the hot dog. You wouldn't think that was very fair. I would think it was a great deal, but you wouldn't feel very. And so that's the whole purpose of equal and uniform, is to make sure that you're paying based off of the value of your property, and everyone is only paying their fair share.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you clarifying that, and I'm not going to go out to dinner with you anytime soon if you're going to make me pay $50 for a hot dog. So, okay, here's one of the things that I like to point out before we just jump in. The last year, if I remember correctly, we talked about 70,000 properties that are taxable in the county. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So, and in 2019, the number you gave me is a little over, well, just under 13,000 valuation protests. So that's 18% of that. What that means is that more than 3/4 of the people in our county looked at the notice that they got and either decided it was correct. In a perfect world, that would be cool, or they just didn't pay attention to it, or they decided there wasn't maybe anything they could do about it and they just let it go. It's just a couple $100 more a year in my escrow account on my mortgage or whatever it is. And I've always looked at these numbers and thought, this is something that we need to be paying attention to as a community. As individuals, we should be managing the things that are important to us. We manage our IRAs and we manage our pensions, and we work to make those things all work. And then you have a house and you just kind of let this big number just sort of sit there and hope everything turns out okay. And part of the purpose of doing this event is to give people the opportunity to understand the process of managing the tax component of their property, give them a strategy to do that. But I've just always thought it's really strange that really it's a somewhat small number, a smaller number than I'd expect, of people who actually do go through the process. The other question we get is, will you do it for me? And as Denisha said at the very beginning of our event tonight, we, as REMAX 3D Real Estate, aren't licensed to do this. That's not a service that we offer, but there are people out there who do offer that service. Anything you'd like to say about that?
No, you're exactly right. There are professionals out there that are property tax consultants. Those folks do have to be registered through the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. If they're going to charge a fee to contest a property value for a property owner, they have to be licensed with TDLR. So I would just encourage you, if you're going to use a tax consultant, just make sure they're registered and in good standing with the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. just do your research and verify that. But yeah, absolutely. If someone feels that they don't have the time or the capacity, or they just don't want to do it, that's an option that they have available to them.
Okay. All right, we've spent the first part of our time tonight sort of laying the groundwork, and that property notice is one of those things that we get lots of questions about, so I wanted to spend some time there, and kind of what you as an organization do and what you're charged to accomplish. Those sorts of things I think are important. But we're going to spend the rest of our time tonight talking about what that title slide was, which is a strategy for protesting property values as they relate to property taxes. So we're going to start here with number one. And this is something that I don't think a lot of people know exist. As I've talked to people over the last several years, this to me is one of the most important things to start with. You can ask the Central Appraisal District for your property record card. And here's an example of one. But Brent, kind of talk about the data that's on this card.
Yeah, absolutely. The property record card is going to list what your square footage is that we have in the system. It's going to show the quality of construction that we've rated your home. It's going to list the size of the lot or the amount of acreage that we show on your legal description. It's going to talk about the different amenities, if there's swimming pools, if outbuildings, anything that we have on that record will be listed on this property record card. I'll give you a prime example of why it's so important. We had a gentleman just this year already that filed a protest because his value had gone up significantly. Our appraiser had actually picked up a swimming pool on their property this year, but in doing the data entry, he keyed it in and somehow it got put on the property twice. And so when he called in, we were talking about it. The appraiser said, well, I noticed here that we have you listed with 2 swimming pools. Is that correct? And he kind of laughed. He said, well, I don't even want the 1 swimming pool I already have. So no, I do. So that was a real easy fix. We eliminated one of the pools. It reduced his value and he was happy and we got that resolved. So it's really important to take a look at this, see what all amenities we have listed, the square footage. And I think you're going to get into some of that here shortly. But yeah, this is a really good tool to make sure that our records are true and correct and accurate.
Whenever you're looking to make sure something's correct, I always tell people to start with the simple things. And what you just explained is such an easy one. Obviously, Central Appraisal District didn't think he had 2 pools, but until it got highlighted, there was no fix for that. It didn't pop up. I had a gentleman last year who had a significant difference between the square footage in his house as it was built, and it was on his building plans and existed, versus what was on here. And so those kinds of things. And that points out number 2. So after asking for the property card, compare the data as you know it to that property card and make sure there are no errors. A primary one here is square footage. Because that's a big component of valuation. As realtors, we always talk about square footage, and it's not the only thing, and it gets adjusted by various items, but square footage is kind of one of those building blocks of building a valuation. Non-living space, barns, garages, porches, carports, outbuildings, all of those things, make sure that they're correct, because that's an easy one. There's no argument about it. There's no my opinion versus your opinion. It's either there or it's not. And it's easy to put together the data to make sure that we're all on the same page. Anything else that we should be paying attention to in terms of those errors?
Well, no, I agree with what you said. These are very fact-specific items that we can fix very easily. Really, an appraisal sometimes is very subjective. It's based on an opinion of value. But when we're talking about an error in square footage or additional improvements that don't exist, those are the easiest ones that we can work with. So as Kevin mentioned, if you have your building plan or a fee appraisal that shows we have inaccurate information, file your protest, bring it in to us. Those are the ones we can get you in and out real quick and get you taken care of.
Well, and this is especially important in that first year after you buy a property. because you don't know it. It's a good time to dig in. You got an appraisal. Your lender required an appraisal for you to get a mortgage. So you have an actual appraisal where someone's come out and physically done all the measurements, and it's really easy to take that and make that comparison. So we certainly encourage people to do that.
And Kevin, I do want to mention, our office is currently closed to the public. We're still taking calls, working with folks via email. And so if you want to get a copy of that property record card, you'll need to make a request to our email address. And you can send that request to huntcad@hunt-cad.org. And we'll receive that request, and then we'll send you a PDF version of your property record card to the email address that you make the request from.
Okay, and thank you so much for highlighting that. I meant to do that because you set up an address specifically for that, and that really does make it easy for people to do. In normal years, you have a computer available in your lobby to come in and gather that information, and I really do kind of encourage people to do that. But this year, this is how they're going to have to do that. Okay, so number 1 is property card. Number 2 is looking at heirs. Number 3, and this is something that very, depending on what your experience is in our county, how long you've been here, you may not really understand what's happening in our property values year to year. And I'm talking about the whole market. I have people who, we look at a house together and they tell me there is just no possible way they should be asking those kinds of dollars for that house. It's just not worth it. But they're doing that based on perhaps a lot of history of what the property values in this community have been. And here's a graph that kind of shows that. In 2008, the average home value in Hunt County was a little bit under $100,000, about $95,000. It took all the way from 2008 to 2015 for that average value to go up just a hair over $100,000, or an increase of about 6.5 or 7%. From 2008 to 2015. Last year in 2019, the average home value in Hunt County was $165,000. So in only those 2016, 17, 18, and 19, in 4 years, we've jumped almost 65%. So if someone hasn't been paying attention to what's happening to home values, and I hope people are watching news. They see tons of people moving to Texas, and our economy has just been humming along. All of those things produce real estate value. But if you take a look at this and compare that to your own property, that may give you kind of a sense of, wow, the value on the notice is really up, but so is the value of the average property and all my neighbors' properties and the properties I'm seeing in real estate listings. All of those sorts of things. You need to understand kind of what's happening in the whole market.
Yeah, I think that what this chart that you're seeing right here is it's a reflection of the actual real estate market in Hunt County over those years. And I think it's important for people to understand that just because you're not looking to sell your home still has value. And what we look at is, what could you sell it for if you were to sell your home? And so that's why you see that average home value increase. Starting about 2015, we really saw the home market take off in Hunt County. And, I know people get upset because we've got people moving in from the Metroplex or from out of state that are paying higher amounts for homes because to them it may be a good deal. And it's just unfortunate that when they do that, that sets the market value for your home as well.
Yeah, but it's like any investment that we make. The whole point of making an investment is to see an increase in value. And this has been an investment. Anyone who owns a home right now is kind of enjoying that increased value. The tough part is, just like a CD, you can't actually do anything with the additional funds until you get rid of it. In this case, sell a home, but it's still there. So it's one of those things that we can manage in terms of our own personal net worth. And it should be a very major part of that. You just said something about the value of individual properties. And so the next step is to find the comps. And comps is kind of one of those words that we as realtors throw around all the time. Oh, sure, we'll run comps for you. I want you to understand exactly what that means. And here's where we as realtors can help folks in the community start to figure out what their number is for their house. If they understand that overall as a community, we are seeing increased values, now we got to narrow it down to their house so that they can kind of have a feel of where that is compared with that property notice they got. So a realtor can do this. We usually need a property address, and we need the number of bedrooms and baths because those typically aren't on public records. And then we'll just run a list of similar properties. And here's the definition. A comp is a comparable sale. So a comp is not your next door neighbor that's asking $400,000 for his $200,000 house. That isn't a comp. So a comparable sale, a property that is similar location, size, amenities, finishes, age is an important one. All of those things need to be similar for a comp to be usable to identify my property's property value. And then, of course, once you have comps, then you got to decide that you either agree with those comps or not. And as realtors, we have that question from people. People say, "Oh, I know that house. That's a disaster inside." Well, we didn't know that because we hadn't been in the house. We're just running numbers. And so there's individual information that can be added to that. But comps is something we should be asking your appraisers for as part of our due diligence in this.
Yes, absolutely. And one other thing I'll mention to your slide here, for a comp to be taken into consideration, it does need to be, the sale needed to occur within the past year. So when
Yes.
we're looking at sales comps, if you have one that's more than 12 months old, we really can't use that because the market is changing significantly in that time frame. But when you file your protest, one of the things you want to ask the appraiser that you meet with or talk to is to have them provide you the comps that we've used to come up with the value. And if you have additional comps that we didn't put in that evidence, ask us to put that into our comp grid, and we'll stick it in there. We'll run out the adjustments. We're trying to get it to where we're looking at apples to apples.
Mm-hmm.
If we have a comp sale that had additional amenities, a swimming pool, barns that your property doesn't have, we're going to make adjustments to that sale price to get them to be apples to apples comparison.
Yeah. Yeah, the apples to apples is the important part of that. That's really the definition of comp, is something that's comparable. So it has to be similar. And oftentimes we narrow that down to specific neighborhoods because the houses in a neighborhood are the same age. They were built kind of out of the same materials. They have been purchased oftentimes by sort of people at similar stages of life. And so all of those things associate to, or are part of the value. There are times, though, that once you come up with a group of comps, that sometimes make your house different than what you're seeing in those. And I've got a kind of a list of those here. One of those might be if you bought the house in the last year, and let's say the comps come out with some number, but you bought the house in the last year, and you've got a closing disclosure that says, hold it, but with an arm's length transaction, this is actually what I paid for it. What is that going to mean to your appraisers as we have this discussion?
Oh, that evidence and that piece of information is gold to us because when we're talking about market value, again, we go back to the definition of market value: a willing buyer, a willing seller, what that property would transfer for cash or its equivalent. And so if it's just sold in the past 12 months and it was on the open market, that's the best evidence of what that property was worth.
Mm-hmm.
You have recently purchased your property in the past 12 months, and we have our appraisal higher than what you paid for it, and it was an open market transaction. Bring us that documentation, and we can get it changed, and we can get it set at your sale price. Now, Texas is not like some other states where once we set it at your sale price, it stays at your sale price. But we do want to get the right baseline. So if you just bought it this year for X amount, we need to get it set there so that in years moving forward, as the market adjusts, we're adjusting it off of the correct value to begin with.
Okay, very good. So again, this relates to documentation, and we're going to kind of pull all this together with these 7 steps in a moment. But documentation is so important in this process because the more you're looking at documents and numbers versus someone's opinion, the clearer the process can be for both sides of the table.
Right.
Okay, so that's number 5. Number 6 is condition. If an individual calls me up and says, I want to list my home, I'm always going to tell them I want to come visit them in their home. I want them to show me their house, because what is inside the home is oftentimes going to have an effect on the value that I think we can sell the house for. I can look and say all the neighborhood homes are all about the same size, same age, same condition. So your house is going to kind of be in this range. But then we get inside and all of a sudden discover that there are, whether it's issues with the house or there are odd design things, it's just stuff that inside that affects that. We're going to change the number that we think that we can sell the house for. And the picture here is an example in Hunt County. Just like most of North Texas, we have this soil that loves to move around on us, and it creates some issues. Age and weather create issues, and all of those things change the value of a home, which means that they need to be at least discussed and addressed as we talk to your appraisers.
Yeah, I knew a guy who had a foundation repair company, and he once told me that he can always tell when we send our appraisal notices out because his phone for estimates right off the bat. So, but that is important information. If you can bring in, if you have foundation issues, or if you have repairs that need to be made, you need to keep in mind that when our appraisers are looking at your property, we're only seeing things from the outside. We don't go into your home or your business to inspect those properties. And so if there are issues on the interior, we need your help to be made aware of that. As Kevin mentioned, pictures are great. If you can, please try to date stamp those pictures so we know that they're recent and current. Repair estimates, again, if the repair estimates are 3 or 4 years old, we're probably not going to be able to take those into consideration. You may need to get current estimates so we can actually use that as evidence. But that's all great information to help us understand the individual characteristics and issues of your property that we're not able to see or detect from our exterior inspections.
Okay, so again, document. Don't just come in and say, I don't know what to do. Come up with some specifics. And I think sometimes that's the most important thing. The last in the 7 steps is really to be very specific about what you're trying to accomplish. And we're going to talk about some sort of revised procedures for the protests this year because of not being able to do it in person. So this year, it's even more important than ever to be very specific about what you're looking for. If the value is X and a homeowner feels it should be Y, I always tell people it's a good idea. Ask for that number. This is the number that I think it should be. And here, based on all of the stuff that I've got, this is the evidence that I have for you that shows that my property really should be a different number. If the percentage of increase is just more than someone thinks it should be, why is that? What's the evidence that you can bring and put together in a package that says something was not as accurate as it could be, and we need to address this?
Yeah, absolutely. If you can come in with something in mind that you think your property is worth based on some research and some evidence that you have. A lot of times folks will come in and they'll say, well, I can only afford this amount of taxes. So value would make my tax this amount. And we really can't have that conversation. Our job is not to determine how much tax you pay. To be honest with you, the appraisal district is not concerned with the amount of tax you pay. We're concerned with getting the value of your property correct. And so come in with a very specific, detailed game plan and idea of what you think your property would sell for in its current condition as of January 1 this year, and be able to help us understand why that is. And again, documentation is so key, especially this year, Kevin, with us being closed to the public due to COVID-19. It's going to be very important when you file that protest to have all that information already gathered up and submit it with your protest so that our appraisers, when they sit down in front of their computer and they pull up your protest, they have all that evidence and they can contact you as the homeowner and start discussing those things and hopefully already have something in mind that y'all can agree to get it resolved, and not have to move forward with a formal appraisal review board hearing.
Okay, so let's quickly review. Number one was property cards. Number two was take a look at those property cards and make sure the information is correct. So in other words, we want to correct any errors. Number three, we really do need to understand the current market. Number four, we need to find comparable properties that give us an indication of the value of the specific property that we're talking about. Number five is gathering documentation that's important to demonstrate even why it might be different than the information that we come to with the comps. Number six is looking at condition, and it's a great place to bring in pictures and bring in recent estimates, all of which help build a case for a valuation that is different than was originally proposed. And then the last thing is to be very specific about what we want. And this is probably a good place to stop and say, you know, this process is something that as realtors we can help with, but your office has also got ways to help people understand, and we'll talk about your website in a minute and the information that's there. There are lots of places people can go for help in this process. The key is you got to do the process. You've got to come up with the information. You do have to spend some time and do a little bit of digging, but there are people and places out there that are ready and willing to help. Can you talk a little bit about once I've got all this stuff, I got my whole packet, I got all my pictures, I got everything, and I'm ready to go. Tell us a little bit about the protest process, particularly as it relates to this year.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, this year things are completely different than what you're going to be used to. Our office is going to be closed to the public. You know, we're just looking out for the health and safety of our staff, of the public, and our appraisal review board members. We did push back the notice deadline this year, which means the protest deadline has also been pushed back accordingly. So you need to file that protest by May 22nd of this year. And we are requiring anyone who wants to discuss their appraisal notice to file a formal protest. We're not doing any of the in-person informal meetings like we've done in the past. In order for us to know that you want to talk about your value, you need to file that protest, and it has to be done by May 22nd. We'll go through the informal process via telephone calls or email communication through the rest of this month, and then we'll start the appraisal review board hearings late May. And we really anticipate, because they're all going to be conducted telephonically, it slows the process down greatly. We may still be having appraisal review board hearings in August and possibly on into September of this year. We're usually done with the protest process by early to mid-July, but we think we're probably going to go on into September this year because of the fact that we can't have people in our office.
Gotcha. Okay, so specifically, kind of walk through the 4 different ways that someone can actually file that protest.
Sure. The best way, and what we want to encourage everyone to do, is utilize our online protest portal. And you can find that on our website at www.hunt-cad.org. If you go to our homepage, up in the top right-hand corner, there's an icon for the online protest. You will need the PIN number that's on your appraisal notice, because you'll have to register an account. It's a very simple, user-friendly process. It'll walk you through the steps, but you'll register an account. You can protest every property that you have through that portal. In years past, we've only allowed homestead properties to protest online, but this year, because of the fact that we're not open to the public, any and every property type can use that portal. It's fast, it's easy, and really it's very secure, and it gives you that confidence because you get an immediate response indicating that we have received your protest and that it was timely, and that one of our appraisers will try to get back in touch with you as soon as possible.
Awesome. If
you don't want to use the online protest portal, you can email your protest in to us. That email address is onlineprotest@hunt-cad.org. It's very simple. Just fill out the form, scan it, email it in to us. You can also send it in to us via regular first-class mail, or if you want to, you can come by our office and drop it off in our drop box in the front of the office. So those are the 4 ways that we're able to receive your protest this year. But again, the most important point to make is if you disagree, you must file that protest by that May 22nd deadline.
Okay. And so online is really kind of the ideal way to do it. I've kind of put a picture there with that link that's up in the upper corner. And the key component of this is on the notice that people received, there is a PIN that they will need to go ahead and register that. And then they can kind of walk through the process on your website.
That's correct. And I will warn everyone, if you want to use the online protest portal, you will have to, if you have multiple properties, you'll need to file a separate protest online for each property that you talk about.
Okay. All right. I'm going to kind of miss the conversations individually with your folks. I do that most years, and that's going to be very different to not be able to do that this year. But I think online, especially with the advantage of knowing that once I file, I'm going to get something back that says the file has been, the protest has been received, and then the process of communications back and forth. If I remember correctly from past years, you'll get a notice saying there's communication from your appraiser waiting for you, and then you get online and you can log in and see that. But so you said number 1, you have to file a formal protest. So that's a little change from in the past. In the past, we did that only if we were not going to be able to use the informal process and we wanted to go to ARB. This time we do it either way. But if we can't informally come to an agreement, then the opportunity is always there to go to the ARB. Will you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And first of all, I want to go back to a point you made. It is a very eerie feeling this year for this time of year in early May to pull into this office building and actually find a parking lot. So it's a little but yeah, the Appraisal Review Board, they are a board consisting of citizens of Hunt County. They are not employees of the appraisal district. They volunteer to serve on this board. And again, they're going to be conducting hearings via telephone only this year. They schedule those hearings, and the purpose of the Appraisal Review Board is to listen to disputes or disagreements between the appraisal district and property owners. And so you need to, if you do decide to go before the Appraisal Review Board, make sure you present and provide all of your evidence prior to your hearing, because they will make their determination solely based on evidence. They can't take anything else into consideration. They don't make it based off of emotions. They don't make it based off of your capability to pay the property taxes. It's all based on evidence as to what is the correct true value of your property. So once they've heard argument and looked at evidence from both parties, the 3-member panel will make a decision. Once they've made that decision, they will send notification to the property owner of what their final decision is. And then at that point, the property owner has the right to either go through what's called binding arbitration, or they can go through district court and sue the appraisal district. So there's some additional options outside of the ARB, but to go to district court or to go to binding arbitration, you must first have exhausted those administrative remedies and had a hearing before the Appraisal Review Board.
Okay. All right. So one of the key things I heard you say was all of the information needs to be sent in, whether or not you're doing the online protest for the sort of informal process this year or the ARB. All the information has to be packaged up and provided ahead of time. There's no bringing those last documents kind of at the end, because you won't be physically in front of someone.
Yeah, that's going to be the challenge, and we know it's difficult. But we're not saying you necessarily have to have all the evidence at the time you file the protest, but it would be helpful. But you will have to have the evidence to us prior to the actual ARB hearing. Now, what will happen is the Appraisal Review Board will send you notification of your hearing 15 days in advance of your actual hearing. So once you receive that letter from the appraisal review board saying your hearing is set for 15 days, that's kind of your indication that you're now on the clock to make sure you get that to us within that 15 days.
Okay. All right. Okay. So that kind of takes us through the process. I do want to highlight, here's the website. The Hunt County Appraisal, the Central Appraisal District website has a ton of information. There's lots of videos. There's the documents that you may need are there. There's information about all of these things we've been talking about. Brent actually did kind of a concise, sort of the same process, but kind of a step-by-step video that's on there, and you can walk through that PowerPoint. So there are lots of resources there that I think people may want to take advantage of. We've kind of come to the end of this conversation, but before we leave, I do want to put up our contact information. We'll have the REMAX 3D real estate information here in just a second. But if there are questions about this presentation or things that are maybe more specific than kind of a big, broad, general question that people may want to ask, I'm very happy to do that, and I think you would be as well, happy to answer those questions.
Yeah, glad to answer any questions.
Okay, and I'm going to just take it to this slide, and Danisha, there you go. I knew you were coming back in here in a second. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you guys. You did a great job and you provided so much information. So thank you, thank you. I even made a couple notes myself. So that was great to have. We did have a few questions come in, so let's go over those really quick. Give me just a second and I will scroll down to those questions so we can see what they are, see what they were. All right, first up, Miss Lori Howe had a question for us. Her question was, first, hey guys, thank you for doing this for us. 2 questions. What is the process for filing for ag use? I know a lot of my clients have asked this question.
So first you have to fill out an application. And in order to qualify, the property must have been used for some type of agricultural use for 5 out of the past 7 years. The deadline for filing is April 30th. And so the application is very simple. You can still file for the ag use all the way up until the time that we certify the appraisal roll. But if it's past the April 30th deadline and between the certification, there is a 10% penalty for filing late. But you do have to meet certain degree of intensity standards. We have all that information on our website. You can go to our website and look under forms to get the application. And we also have our ag use appraisal manual on our website that lists the different uses that qualify and about the time frames and what you must do to qualify.
Perfect. Thank you so much. She had a second question. And also, should the appraised value be less than market value? If someone just got their appraisal back on a new home and it was for what they paid for, which was top market value, should they protest?
So if they just purchased the property, more than likely the appraised value and the market value are going to be the same unless they're receiving the benefit from the previous owner's exemptions. And we do have that happen on occasion, especially whenever someone purchases a home, and whenever they go through the closing process, they have what they are told is going to be their tax liability. But what the closing company or someone didn't understand is the previous owner had an over 65 exemption and their taxes were frozen and they didn't catch that for whatever reason. And it doesn't happen all the time. And it's an honest mistake, but it's very easy to miss. And then so the following year, whenever we pick up that ownership change and we remove the over 65 exemption from the previous owner, all of a sudden their tax liability jumps up significantly because that freeze was removed, that ceiling was removed from that. So if you're buying a home, make sure to ask that question, hey, did the previous owners have any exemptions? And if so, what will my taxes be without the exemptions?
Great question. Yes. Okay. Mandy Stewart had a question for us. She said, can you give an overview of the income approach and how a value is determined by using that method?
Yeah, the income approach to value is one of the three main approaches, and it's used more for income producing properties. Your strip centers or your apartments or hotels and motels, anything that the property itself produces an income through rent rates. And what we look at is what the typical rents are in that market, and then we back out what typical expenses would be, and then we use a capitalization rate. We come up with the net operating income for that property, and then we apply an appropriate capitalization rate to give us an indicated value for the property. And so when we talk about the income approach to value, and we send surveys out every year to commercial property owners requesting income and expense information. And the reason we do is because we're trying to establish income models and schedules that we can apply across the board to all income producing properties.
Very good. One more question. This came to us from Mary Gibson. I know we said at the beginning we weren't going to get into specifics, but I'm going to go ahead and put the question here, and then you can answer it how you would like to. Can you explain why our land values increased so much, 33%? We understand many of our neighbors have the same increase or more than the Cedars neighborhood. And the reason I went ahead and posted that is I have received that question about land values increasing versus like the improvement value. So maybe if you could address that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be glad to. And I think that's a really good question. It's not really specific to one property. It's kind of an overall general question. And when we talk about market value, you all as real estate agents understand this better than anything. You don't sell a piece of property and say, okay, you're going to pay X amount for the home and X amount for the land. You sell it as a package. You're going to spend $200,000 for this piece of property with the house and the land, and it's typically not allocated out how much you're spending on each one. The tax code requires us to split it out between the improvement values and the land values. And what we typically try to do is keep a reasonable ratio where the land is anywhere from 12 to 20% of the total value of the property as a whole. And sometimes when we're doing our appraisals every year, we'll look at increasing the improvement values, and sometimes that'll get out of whack. We'll notice that we have in a certain subdivision or neighborhood, the improvement value may be 95% of the total value, and the land only makes up 5%. And so we have to reallocate that. And when we look at sales information for similar properties in those neighborhoods, ultimately what we're looking at, regardless of how we have it segregated or split out, we could have $1 on the house and $400,000 on the land. As long as the total value is $401,000 and that's what the property would sell for, it really doesn't matter how we have it split out between land and improvements. But sometimes we just have to reallocate those land values so we have a reasonable ratio of land to property as a whole.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. There's one more question. It's really not a question, but it was more of a comment, but I thought it would be good to go back and address. She said, this was Chris Humble, and said, I feel sorry for those without computers, internet service, or are technology challenged. So I want you to if you will, go back and talk about if the internet's a problem or a computer is a problem, there are options again for protesting and getting that to you without having to use technology.
Yeah, you can still file your protest through the regular first class mail. You can send it into our office, P.O. Box 39, Greenville, Texas, 75403. Or you can come drop it off at our office. We have a drop box out front. Just slide it in there. Again, just make sure that it's to us by May the 22nd. Now, when we receive those protests, either through the mail or the drop box, we're going to make every effort to contact those property owners via the telephone and try to start working those out and getting as many resolved as we can. Just have to be, we're asking for a lot of patience this year. You may drop your protest off today and you may not hear anything from us for another 4 weeks. So we just don't know what the volume is going to be like and how we're going to be able to process all these without the one-on-one face-to-face meetings that we usually have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. Kevin, looks like we have a sweet comment from your son, Austin Sawatsky, that said, "Great job, Dad." So it's always nice to
Hey, Dad.
have a kiddo there. You'll be your next kiddo buying a house, so this is
That's right.
now. All right. Well, that wraps up our presentation. For anyone that needs a comparative market analysis, you are welcome to reach out to REMAX 3D Real Estate. Our information is there. Contact your favorite REMAX 3D real estate agent. We're happy to get that to you. For any other specific questions regarding your appraised value, get in touch with the Hunt County Appraisal District, and their phone numbers are listed below as well. So that wraps up our evening, and I hope that you found this as helpful as those of us watching did. And I just want you to know, as REMAX 3D Real Estate, we love where we live, and we love Hunt County. And this is one of the ways that we can give back to you to help you be informed about what's going on in our community. So from our heart to yours, I just want to say thank you for joining us, and we are praying that you all stay safe and have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Mr. South, and thank you, Mr. Sawatsky. Y'all have a great evening too.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.